My name is Helena Mercer, and I was 29 years old the year my dad died and left me a closet. 3 weeks after the funeral, I drove home from a day shift in Knoxville, put my key in the front door of the house on Poplar Street, and it would not turn. New deadbolt. Bright brass, still shiny. The packaging was in the trash can at the end of the driveway, and my brother was sitting in his work truck across the street with the engine running, waiting for me to figure it out. 6 boxes sat on the porch under a blue tarp because it had been raining since noon. That was the whole inheritance. A closet, 6 boxes, and a tarp somebody else had thought to put there. What I did about it took me 6 months, cost me my job, and started with a stranger on a porch who knew the exact date my mother died. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is where we sit down with the stories families keep behind closed doors. The slow ones. The ones that take years to tell. The ones that end at a kitchen table instead of a courtroom. If a story like this has ever sounded a little too much like your own family, you are in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The copy of the will came in a manila envelope from the probate clerk in Anderson County, and I read it in the parking lot at work with my headset still around my neck. 3 pages. My dad's signature on the last one. Small and cramped. Nothing like the signature I had watched him put on invoices my whole life. Dale's name was on every line that mattered. The house at 118 Poplar Street, the shop, the trucks, the accounts, the equipment, the name on the sign. Then there was one line for me, near the bottom, in the same flat language as the rest. To my daughter, Helena Ruth Mercer. The contents of the closet in the front bedroom. I read that line 4 times. I kept waiting for it to say something else. The closet in the front bedroom held a vacuum, a box of Christmas lights, and my winter coat. My father had spent his last months in a bed I moved into the dining room so he would not have to climb stairs, and he had thought about that closet, and he had written it down, and somebody had typed it up and made it legal. The part that stopped me was the date. The will had been signed on the 22nd of December 2025, 11 weeks before he died, in the middle of the stretch he spent at the skilled nursing place out on Highway 61, the stretch where he called me Ruth twice and did not know he had done it. I put the pages back in the envelope. My break was over. Here is what I did for a living, and it matters later. I was a medical billing and collections specialist for Cumberland Ridge Health System, 7 years, third desk from the window. My job was the part nobody thinks about. Somebody has a heart attack, somebody gets a bill, and eventually somebody like me calls them. That morning, I had a man named Curtis on the line who owed $9,400 from a gallbladder surgery, and he was already apologizing before I finished my greeting. People always apologize. I told him what I tell everybody. I asked what he could actually do in a month without missing rent. He said maybe 50. I put him on $78 a month, which is what the math needed, and I heard him start breathing again. I knew that system the way a mechanic knows a transmission. I knew a self-pay balance goes to charge off at 210 days. I knew that every quarter the finance office bundled the charged-off accounts into a portfolio and sold the whole batch to a debt buyer for pennies on the dollar, and that after that, the person on the other end started getting letters from a company they had never heard of. I knew who signed off on the sale and what week it usually happened. My supervisor, Margot, used to say I was the only person on the floor who never sounded like a robot. I told her the trick was simple. Every account has a person on the other end. That afternoon, I pulled up the quarterly charge-off queue for something routine, and I sat there a second too long, thinking about a name I had not yet let myself look for. I moved back into the house on Poplar Street in January of 2025, 8 weeks after my dad's first surgery, and I stayed 14 months. I switched to the 6 a.m. shift so I could be home by 3. I learned how to change a bed with a person still in it. I learned that congestive heart failure is not one big event. It is 400 small ones, and that most of them happen between 2 and 4 in the morning. I kept a spiral notebook on the kitchen counter with his doses in it, times down the left side, initials down the right, because that is how my brain works and because writing something down is how I love people. My brother came on Saturdays. He brought a bakery box and he stayed about 40 minutes, and he always said the same thing on his way out, that he had a job bidding Monday. I never held that against him then. The shop was real, the payroll was real, and somebody had to keep the lights on out there. In February, my dad had a good week. He sat up, he ate a whole plate, he watched 2 hours of a fishing show, and told me the guy was lying about the depth. On the Thursday of that week, he looked at me while I was writing in the notebook and he said, "You have always been good at the paperwork part." I laughed. I honestly took it as a compliment. It took me until that manila envelope, 13 months later, to hear it the other way, which is that in his mind, the paperwork was my part, and the house was Dale's. The locks got changed on the 4th of April, which was a Saturday, and I want to be accurate about that day because I have gone over it a lot. I had worked a half shift, I stopped at the pharmacy on Charles Sivers for a prescription that was not mine anymore, which is a stupid thing that happens after somebody dies, and then I drove the 4 minutes home. The tarp was the first thing I saw. Blue, cheap, weighted at the corners with 2 bricks and a coffee can, spread over 6 boxes stacked against the porch rail. My coat sleeve was hanging out of one of them. The doorknob was new, and the deadbolt was new, and there was a strip of paper stuck to the glass with the lock code on it, which nobody had bothered to peel off. I stood there with my key in my hand for about a minute. I did not knock. I did not yell his name. I counted the boxes, because 6 is a number and numbers hold still, and because if I started doing anything else on that porch, I was not going to stop. 14 months of my life had been packed into 6 boxes by somebody who was not there for any of it. His truck was across the street with the engine running and the driver's window down, and he had been sitting there long enough that the wipers were going on the low setting for no reason. He got out when I turned around. He had his good jacket on. That is how I knew he had rehearsed it. Dale is 7 years older than me, and he has never once raised his voice at me, which people find hard to believe. He talks the way he writes an estimate. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps in the rain, and he told me the funeral had cost $4,200 and that he had paid it out of the shop account. He told me Mercer Heating and Air was carrying $190,000 in debt that Dad had signed for and never mentioned. He told me the house had a line of credit against it that he did not know about until March. He said none of that like a man making excuses. He said it like a man reading a bid sheet to a customer who is not going to like the number. Then he told me he needed me out because he could not have a second household in a property he was trying to clean up. And I asked him where exactly he expected me to go, and he looked at the tarp and not at me. "Nobody owes you a house for showing up," he said. I remember the rain on the tarp more than I remember my own face doing whatever it did. I asked him one question. I asked whether Dad had ever had money he did not tell us about. He said no. He said it fast. Faster than a person says no when the answer is just no, before I had finished the sentence, the way you slam a screen door when a wasp is coming in. Then he picked up 2 of my boxes and carried them to my car, which I think in his mind made it a kindness. I found 214 Hillcrest Lane through a paper sign stapled to a phone pole, which tells you everything about the house. $650 a month, 2 bedrooms, a carport with no car in it, and a screen door that did not latch. The living room floor sloped toward the southeast corner hard enough that an orange would roll, slow at first and then with purpose. There was a smell under the kitchen sink that I chased for 3 days before I found the cracked trap. The landlord was a decent man in his 60s named Gil, who told me straight out that the foundation had a pier problem and that he was not going to fix it, and that the price reflected it. I appreciated him for that. He was the first person in a month who told me the truth about a number. Deposit, first month, and the utility hookups took $1,950. That left me $4,100, which had taken me 6 years to save, and which I had been quietly proud of. I moved myself in on the 5th of April with a hand truck I borrowed from work. I put my mother's blue sweater in the top drawer, and my dad's notebook of doses in the bottom one, and then I stood in the kitchen at 11 at night wiping out cabinets that had somebody else's shelf paper in them, and I noticed that I felt something close to fine. That was the part that scared me. Somewhere around the second cabinet I realized somebody was watching me through the window over the sink. Across the street, On the porch of the little brick house, an old woman was standing in the dark, and she had been standing there long enough that it was not an accident. She came over the next morning with a cookie tin, which is the oldest currency there is in East Tennessee. Her name was Ivy Poe. She was 78. She walked with a cane and she took the 2 porch steps one at a time with a lot of engineering. I made instant coffee because that was all I had unpacked. She looked around the kitchen, said Gil should be ashamed of that floor, and then she stopped talking mid-sentence and looked at my collarbone. I was wearing the only thing of my mother's I have ever had, a thin chain with 2 things on it, a small wedding band, too small for any finger I own, and a worn Saint Anne medal. Ivy set her cup down. She did not ask me a question. She told me. "You were born on the 22nd of May," she said. "And your mother died right after, didn't she?" My hands went cold in a way I have only felt twice in my life. I asked her how she could possibly know that. She said my name out loud then, both parts. Helena Mercer, like she was checking it against something in a drawer in her head. Then she said, "I cleaned that house on Poplar for 2 years, 96 and 97. I dusted around that necklace when your mother took it off to wash dishes. I stood there with a cookie tin in my hand and a slanted floor under me, and a woman I had known for 11 minutes describing my mother's hands. And then Ivy Poe said the thing that turned the next 6 months of my life sideways. She said, 'Honey, I was standing in that kitchen the afternoon your mother signed.' I asked her signed what. She looked at me for a long moment, and she said, 'You don't know, do you?' We went to her kitchen because her chairs were better. Ivy Poe told it slow, the way people her age tell things, with the wrong details first. In the winter of 1997, my mother, Ruth, was 7 months along with me, and she was scared. A doctor in Knoxville had told her the placenta was sitting low and that there was a real risk of hemorrhage, and my mother had come home from that appointment and sat at the kitchen table with her coat still on. Ivy remembered the coat. She remembered that Ruth had a piece of land, 11 acres out toward Lake City, that she had gotten from her own mother, and that she had sold it that fall to a man who wanted to put a garage on it. Ray never liked that she sold it, Ivy said. He wanted it in the shop. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in February, a man came to the house with a briefcase and a stamp and a leather pad, and my mother signed papers at the kitchen table on Poplar Street while Ivy Poe ran the vacuum in the next room and tried not to listen. My father was not there. He was out at Oliver Springs putting a furnace in a church, and Ivy said that very carefully, like a woman who has thought about the timing of that for a long time. I asked her the only question that mattered. What did she sign? Ivy pressed her thumb into the tablecloth and thought. "I only ever heard the one name," she said. "It was on the man's folder. Clinch Valley." Clinch Valley Bank and Trust stopped existing in 2004. That is the thing about small banks in small towns. They get eaten, and then the thing that ate them gets eaten. And by the time you come looking, there is nobody at any counter who has ever heard the name. But chasing a file through 3 companies is not a mystery. It is a Tuesday at my job. It is exactly what I did all day, every day for 7 years. Except usually I was chasing an insurance denial instead of my own mother. So I did it the way I would have done it at work. I did not call the main number and ask for help, because the main number is a wall. I called and asked for records retention, by name, and when the first person told me they could not help, I thanked her and asked who would have the file if it was a trust department and not a deposit account, because those get sold separately. That question is the whole trick. Say the words that prove you already know how the machine works, and people stop reading you the script. It took 4 weeks and 11 phone calls and 2 written requests with a copy of my ID and my mother's death certificate stapled behind. On a Thursday in May, a woman named Delia in an archive office in Nashville put me on hold for 9 minutes and came back and said the sentence I have not forgotten. "We do show Avance Trust," she said. "It's not ours anymore. That book went to Fairlane." Fairlane Trust Services is on the 4th floor of a building in Nashville that I have never seen. The first call lasted 19 minutes and consisted almost entirely of a young man asking me to spell things. They wanted my birth certificate, a state ID, my mother's death certificate, and a written request signed and dated. I sent all of it the next morning from the copy shop on Main because I did not have a printer, and it cost me $11. And I remember thinking that was a lot for a lottery ticket. 3 days later, a woman named Priscilla Hodge called me back at 4 in the afternoon while I was in the parking lot at work, and she was so calm about it that I had to ask her to repeat herself. It existed. The Ruth Vance Mercer Trust, established the 11th of February 1997, funded with $46,000. Beneficiary listed as, and she read it out to me exactly, my child, born or unborn. My mother had written me into a legal document before I had a name, before anybody knew what I was, in a room where my father was not standing. I sat in my car with the engine off and the phone against my ear, and I made a sound I am not going to try to describe, and then Priscilla Hodge, being helpful, being thorough, added one more thing off the top of the file, in the pleasant voice of a person reading a note that means nothing to her. Your father was notified in 2015, she said, when we took the book over. There's a signed receipt in here. I drove to Ivy Poe's house that night and I was not kind about it. I asked her how a person keeps a thing like that to herself for 29 years while a kid grows up 2 miles away. She did not get defensive. She got up, poured coffee, neither of us drank, and told me about her son. Dane Poe broke his spleen in 1998 in a wreck on Highway 25, and he was 19 and he had no insurance, and the bill was $2,600, which in 1998 for a woman who cleaned houses was the end of the world. My father paid it. He never said a word about it to anybody, and he never brought it up again, not once, not in 27 years. Ivy said, "In this county that is not a favor. That is a debt." I asked her what changed. She said Dane died last May, kidney trouble, 46 years old. She said, "The man I owed is gone and the boy I owed him for is gone, and I am 78, and I am not carrying it any further." Then she looked at the necklace again. "Your mother signed that paper with you still inside her," she said. "She did that alone in a kitchen on a Tuesday. So don't you sit in my house and ask me if she loved you. I want to be honest about her limits because they matter." Ivy had no documents. She never saw a dollar amount. She told me flat out she would not swear to any of it in front of a judge because she did not remember it well enough to swear to it, and I respected her more for saying so. The copy of the trust document came in the mail 8 days later, 41 pages, and I read it at my kitchen table with a highlighter I had to go by. Here is what I found out, and here is where I need you to slow down with me, because this is the part everybody gets wrong. The trust was real. $46,000 in 1997, managed conservatively by 3 institutions in a row, was worth about $214,000 in 2026. That is real money for a woman renting a house with a bad floor. It was also completely, legally, permanently out of my hands. There was a spendthrift clause, which means neither a creditor nor the beneficiary can reach the principal. My mother put that in on purpose, and I understand exactly why, because she had watched $190,000 of shop debt get signed for at a kitchen table. The trustee had full discretion. Distributions were limited to health, education, maintenance, and support, which is a standard phrase with a hard edge on it, and the principal did not come to me outright until I turned 35. May of 2032. 6 more years. I read those pages 3 times and then I laughed out loud in an empty house because my mother had reached across 29 years to hand me something, and the thing she handed me was a locked door with a note on it. I want to stop here for a second, because people get this wrong about money. Finding it is not the same as having it. If you have ever been handed something that looked like a rescue and turned out to be a locked door, tell me in the comments. I would like to know I was not the only one. And subscribe, because the next part is where I stopped waiting. There was one narrow door in those 41 pages, and it was the word support. I wrote to Priscilla Hodge and I asked for a discretionary distribution, and I did it the way I would have written an appeal at work, which is to say, I did not tell her my feelings. I gave her a rent figure, a utilities figure, a student loan statement, and a 1-page timeline. 15 days later, the committee approved $18,500 for maintenance and support. I paid off my student loan the same afternoon. $14,200, gone in about 90 seconds on a website. 7 years of my life closed out by a green checkmark. It did not feel like winning. It felt like somebody unbuckled a strap I had stopped noticing I was wearing. Then I asked the second question, which was the real one. I asked whether the trust could fund attorney's fees to contest my father's will. Priscilla was kind about it. The answer came in writing 2 days later, and it was one sentence long. Litigation costs do not fall within the health, education, maintenance, and support standard, and the trustee declines. So there it was. My mother's money could keep me fed and housed. It could not buy me a lawyer. It could not buy me the house. And it could not buy me one single hour in a courtroom. I sat with my bank balance on the screen that night, $8,381. And for the first time since I was 22 years old, I did not owe anybody anything. I did not know yet what that was for. I just knew it was the first thing in 6 months that nobody could take back. On a rainy Tuesday in July, I drove past 118 Poplar Street, which I had been doing about once a week, and pretending I had a reason for. And there was a 20-yard construction dumpster in the driveway. The front door was standing open. Two men were pulling carpet out of the living room in long gray strips and stacking it on the porch, and one of them nodded at me when I came up the walk, because I was a woman in work clothes with a lanyard around her neck, and nobody in the trades has ever once asked that woman who she is. The house smelled like tack strip and old dust. The dining room where my dad's bed had been was bare down to the subfloor. I did not touch anything. I went straight to the kitchen because that is what I came for, and I knew it before I turned the engine off. The doorframe between the kitchen and the hall was still there. 20-some pencil marks up the left side, the oldest ones down at knee height and gone soft, the newest ones sharp. Dale's marks all the way up past my head, dated in my father's handwriting. And then mine. 6 of them, spread out over 10 years, the last one at the top with the date beside it in that cramped block print he used on invoices. H9, 2005. My name is not on the deed. It is not on the will. It is not on the sign at the shop or on any account or on one page of anything my family ever owned. It is on that doorframe, in pencil, 4 feet 9 inches off the floor, because one time in 2005 my dad stood me up against a wall and made a line and wrote down that I existed. I put my thumb on it and held it there. I took nothing. On my way out, I saw a schedule taped to the wall by the back door, and the last line said, "List, August 1st." I paid $200 for 45 minutes with an estate attorney in Oak Ridge, and it was the best $200 I have ever spent, because she told me the truth quickly. I brought the probate copy with me, the public one, the same pages anybody can pull off the clerk's counter. She read it in about 90 seconds. Then she explained Tennessee to me. In this state, a parent can disinherit an adult child. Full stop. There is no share I was owed. To break a will, I would have to prove either that he lacked capacity when he signed, or that somebody exercised undue influence over him, and undue influence usually means showing a confidential relationship plus a pile of suspicious circumstances. I had suspicious circumstances. He signed at a skilled nursing facility 11 weeks before he died. The witnesses were his son's bookkeeper and his son's wife. She agreed all of that was worth something. Then she gave me the numbers. $7,500 to retain her. 18 to 24 months. Discovery, depositions, an expert on capacity, and a real chance of losing, in which case I would be out the retainer and everything after it. She asked what I did for work, and when I told her, she nodded and said, "Then you already know how this ends for people without money." I said I did. As I was standing up, she said one more thing, not unkindly, and I carried it around for the next 3 months. "The law can get you money," she said. "It cannot get you a seat at a table." I ran into my Uncle Wendell at the supply house on Charles Severs Boulevard in the last week of July, both of us holding filter boxes, and I watched a 59-year-old man try to become invisible in a lighted aisle. Wendell is my dad's younger brother. He taught me to drive a stick in the church parking lot. He cried harder than anybody at the funeral. He asked how I was doing, and I told him where I was living, and he made a face like the floor had been his idea. Then he said the thing. He said it gently, which is what made it land. Nobody owes anybody a house for showing up. Sugar. Same sentence. Different mouth. 6 weeks apart. That is when I understood I was not dealing with my brother's opinion. I was dealing with a rule that everybody in my family already knew, that nobody had ever written down, and that I had somehow been the last person to hear. The shop goes to the one whose name is on the sign. The girl gets a keepsake and a nice word at the funeral. Wendell walked me out to my car, which he thought was a kindness, and on the way he mentioned, in the way men mention money when they are not thinking, that Dale had just thrown him the mechanical package on the new wing at the elementary school. Good job, he said. 61,000. I said that was great, and I meant it, mostly, and I drove home. The number meant nothing to me standing in that parking lot. It would mean something a few weeks later on a Thursday morning at my desk, on a screen I had looked at 400 times a year. In the second week of August, a girl I used to work with texted me a screenshot from a local buy and sell page. It was a photo of a garage, my brother's garage, with folding tables set up and a hand-lettered sign. Estate cleanout. Everything must go. There were 3 boxes on the end table nearest the camera, and I knew all 3 of them by the tape. The blue sweater my mother wore in every photograph I have of her, the one thing I could still smell her cigarettes on when I was little, was folded on top of the middle box. The post was 6 days old, and it said sold in the comments. $200 for the lot. To a woman who resells at a flea market in Sweetwater. I called the flea market. I drove out there on a Saturday and walked the whole building twice. A man told me the woman I wanted had not been in since July and might not come back until fall. I want to be fair to my sister-in-law here, because it would be easy not to be. Bree did not do that to hurt me. Bree had a garage full of a dead man's belongings, and 2 kids and a husband who was not sleeping, and she needed the space. And she needed $200. That is the whole story of it. Nobody in this needed to be a monster for me to lose my mother's sweater. I sat down on my sloped kitchen floor when I got back that night, and I finally said the true thing out loud to an empty room. I was not looking for money. I was looking for proof that I had been there. On a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of August, I ran the quarterly charge-off queue, which is a report I had run more times than I could count, filtered to self-pay balances over 180 days, sorted by amount. It is a long list. It is somebody's whole year on every line. I was checking for duplicate account numbers, which is dull work. And then my eyes went across a row and stopped the way your foot stops on a stair that is not there. Mercer, Raymond E., self-pay balance, $61,300, 214 days. His insurance had paid what insurance pays. The gap after the surgery and 11 weeks of skilled nursing had landed exactly where those gaps always land, on the family. And my father had died owing a hospital more than the pencil marks on his kitchen doorframe were worth to anybody but me. I did not open his medical record. I want to be very clear about that, because I could have, and it would have taken 4 clicks, and it would have been a federal violation and a firing offense, and I have never once done it to anybody. The Q is billing data. That is all I looked at. And on the far right of that row, in the last column, in the same 9-point font as everything else, was the field labeled Guarantor. It said, Mercer, Dale R. I sat back in my chair. I remembered exactly where I had been standing when that happened. The 20th of August, 2025, admissions desk, 2nd floor. My dad was on a gurney in the hall with an oxygen line and a nurse who kept saying, "We are going to get you upstairs, buddy." Dale had the clipboard because Dale had gotten there first, and the intake clerk was pointing at signature lines with a pen. I do this for a living. I saw the box before he did. The form has 2 places a family member can sign. One says authorized representative, which means you can talk to the hospital and make decisions and hear things. The other one says financially responsible party, and underneath that, in 6-point type, it says the words guarantor and personally liable, and if you sign it, you have just put your own name on somebody else's bill. I I put my finger on the page. I said, "Not that one. Sign the one underneath it." He looked at me the way he has looked at me since I was 11. He said, in front of the clerk, "She does this for a living, so she thinks everything is a trap." And he signed the top box, and the clerk took the clipboard, and they wheeled my dad toward the elevator. I could not sign for him. I was not the one holding the pen, and I had no legal standing to change another adult's signature on a form, and the ambulance crew had been in that hallway 20 minutes already. That is the whole thing. I saw it, I said it out loud, and it happened anyway. Sitting at my desk a year later, looking at that same last name in the guarantor column, I did the arithmetic in my head. $61,300, 6 cents on the dollar. That same week, I had a call with a woman named Ernestine, who was 71 and furious and, underneath it, frightened. She had gotten a letter from a company in Georgia about $12,000 she had never borrowed from anybody in Georgia. She wanted to know how a stranger got the right to call her about her own hip. So I explained it, the way I had explained it 100 times. When a hospital cannot collect a self-pay balance, it charges it off, and every quarter it packages up the charged-off accounts into a portfolio and sells the whole batch. Nobody buys those for face value. They go for a few cents on the dollar, sometimes 6, sometimes 2, and the older and more picked over the paper is, the cheaper it gets. Whoever buys it becomes the creditor, legally, completely, all the way. They step into the hospital's shoes. Ernestina said, "So they own me." And I said what I always say, which is, "No ma'am. They own a number, and every account has a person on the other end. If you have ever gotten a collection letter from a company you never did business with, that is why, and nobody ever explains it to you. So do me a favor and share this with somebody who is scared of their mailbox. And subscribe, because what I did with that piece of information is the rest of this story." After I hung up with Ernestine, I sat very still, because I had just said the sentence out loud. Again, the same as always. They step into the hospital's shoes. Every right the hospital had, including the right to sue, and including the right to forgive it. I went home and read my own employee code of conduct, which I had signed 7 times without reading, 14 pages of it. It was all there, and it was clear, and it was right. An employee may not acquire an interest in receivables sold by the system. An employee may not use non-public information about system operations for personal benefit. An employee may not work an account in which she has a personal or family interest. Every one of those rules exists because somebody once did something ugly, and I have always thought they were good rules. Here is the part I am not proud of. I sat at that table for a full hour and I thought about how easy it would be to say nothing. The portfolio was going to be sold in September to a buyer in Louisville. That buyer resells tranches on the secondary market constantly. I could wait 4 months, buy a small piece of picked over paper from a third party like any other private citizen, and there would be no report, no flag, no trail, nothing anybody would ever look at. I could have done that. It would have worked. And I would have spent the rest of my life explaining to myself why it did not count. At 1 in the morning, I opened my laptop and searched 2 things. The first was how to register a collection agency in Tennessee, because I needed to know exactly what I was and was not allowed to do. The second was how to report a conflict of interest to your own compliance department. I still had my dad's torch kit. It had been in one of the 6 boxes, which was funny in a bleak way, since it was the only thing in there worth money. I drove out to the shop lot on a Wednesday at 10 after 6 in the morning to leave it in the bed of Dale's truck, because I did not want to hand it to him and have a conversation about it. The lot was empty except for the truck, and the truck was running, and my brother was asleep in the cab. He had the seat back as far as it goes. His boots were off and set neatly on the passenger floorboard, laces tucked in, the way our father did it. His jacket was folded under his head. On the dash, held down by a socket wrench so the defroster would not blow them around, was a stack of envelopes with the windows on them, and the top one had the red band across it that the finance companies use so you will open it. I stood there about as long as it takes to boil water. He was 36 years old, and he was sleeping in a truck in his own parking lot at dawn because he had told his wife the loan came through. I did not wake him up. I put the torch kit in the bed, and I got in my car, and I sat at the end of the drive for a minute with my hands on the wheel. At 9 that morning, my phone buzzed with a text from him. It said, "House closes October 9th. Don't come." Halstead Receivables is in Louisville, and their office manager is named Ray, which I chose to find funny rather than upsetting. I called on a Monday as a private buyer, which small ones do all the time, and I asked whether they were taking any of the Cumberland Ridge September paper. He said they were taking the whole book. I asked whether they broke it into tranches for resale, and he said they did, and that the medical stuff moved fast. I asked what a small piece would run. He said 6, maybe 6.5, depending on how fresh it was. So I did the math with him on the phone like it was a bid. $61,300 of face value at 6 cents is $3,678. I had 8,381. I could actually do this. And then Ray asked me the ordinary question that ends the easy version of this story. He asked what entity name to put on the purchase agreement, and whether I was affiliated with a provider, because they have to certify that they are not selling paper back to the originator's people. It is a checkbox on a form. It takes 4 seconds. I told him I would call him back. I sat in my car in my own driveway for a while with the phone face down on my knee, doing the thing I had been avoiding since 1 in the morning 8 days earlier. Then I opened my work calendar and put a meeting on it for 8 the next morning, and in the subject line I typed the word disclosure. At 8 in the morning on the 28th of August, I sat in a small conference room with my supervisor Margot Sheets and a compliance officer named Alan Trice, whose entire job is to hear things nobody wants to say. I had it typed on one page because that is how I do everything. I told them my father's account was in the current charge-off queue. I told them the guarantor on that account is my brother. I told them I had contacted a debt buyer about purchasing a tranche after the portfolio sale, that I had not purchased anything, that I had not opened the medical record, and that everything I knew about the sale schedule I knew from doing my job. Alan wrote the whole time and did not look up. Margot did look up, about halfway through, and her face did a thing I will remember. When I finished, I took the second page out of the folder and put it on the table next to the first one. It was my resignation, effective in 2 weeks. Margot asked if I was sure. She asked it twice, and the second time she asked it slower, which is how a decent person tells you they are giving you a door. I said I was sure. Because there is no version of this where I keep the badge and the paycheck and also do what I was about to do, and I was not going to be a person who did it quietly and told herself it was fine. I turned in my headset and my badge on the 11th of September and walked out to the parking lot past the third desk from the window. In 1 hour I had closed every hospital business office within 200 miles to myself, for good, in writing. I have never felt so light in my life, and that is the part that should have scared me. I formed a single-member limited liability company on the 12th of September for $300 and an afternoon of forms, and I named it Hillcrest Lane Holdings, after a rented house with a bad floor, which felt right. I knew exactly what it did and did not let me do. In Tennessee, if you go around collecting other people's debts as a business, you need to be registered, and I was not, and I did not want to be. I was allowed to buy paper and enforce my own rights on my own account. That is all I wanted, and it is all I ever did. On the 15th of September, I wired $3,678 to Halstead Receivables in Louisville for a tranche of 41 accounts out of the Cumberland Ridge September book. I paid 6 cents on the dollar for paper, with a face value of $61,300, plus the 40 other files that came stapled to it, because you cannot buy one account. You buy a piece of a batch. I told Ray in Louisville exactly where I had worked and exactly what day I had left, and he wrote both on the certification, and neither of us pretended it was a small thing. 40 of them were strangers, and I will tell you what I did with those in a minute, because it matters. The data file came as a spreadsheet with the columns I had stared at for 7 years. Row 29 had my father's name in it, and his account number, and his balance. and the last column had my brother's name in it. I read that row about 9 times. My whole family, in a spreadsheet, sold to me for less than the cost of the funeral. The physical file came 4 days later in a banker's box. Bill of sale, chain of title showing the account moving from Cumberland Ridge to Halstead to Hillcrest Lane Holdings, the account level data, and a copy of the admissions paperwork from the 20th of August 2025, with my brother's signature on it, in the financially responsible party box, in his own hand, where I had put my finger on the page and told him not to. I laid all of it out on this kitchen table in a house where the floor slopes, and I sat there until the light went orange. Then I made one more phone call, and this is the one that changed the shape of the next 3 weeks. The closing on 118 Poplar Street was being handled by a title company on Market Street in Clinton. I called them as a creditor, which I now was, and I asked a technical question that any creditor is entitled to ask. I asked what happens to a residential closing if there is an open lawsuit against the seller for a substantial sum. The woman did not hesitate, because it is not a secret. It is just Tuesday for her. She said the underwriter will not write clean title over an open claim that size. She said they would either kill it or hold the entire net proceeds in escrow until it resolves, which she said usually runs about 18 months. She said no investor waits 18 months. I thanked her and put the phone down on the table. I could end the sale of my father's house with a filing fee of $289 and a staple. The night of the 8th of October, I sat at the kitchen table until almost midnight with 2 envelopes. In the first one was a complaint, drafted off a form and checked twice, naming Dale R. Mercer as guarantor, demanding $61,300, signed and dated and ready to walk into the circuit court clerk's office at 8 in the morning, which is 1 block and about 90 seconds from the title company. In the second envelope was something I did not have to draft at all, because I had built 400 of them. A payment agreement, the same template we used at Cumberland Ridge, down to the hardship reason line and the box where you write in what the person can actually do in a month without missing rent. I filled in the blanks by hand. I did the arithmetic 4 times, not because it is hard, but because I wanted my hands busy. I want to be honest with you about that night. I did not know which envelope I was going to open. Anybody who tells you they knew a thing like that in advance is smoothing the story out. I had done everything right. I had paid for all of it. I had walked away from a career for the privilege of holding a piece of paper. And the paper worked. It genuinely worked. I could take the house. Around 11, Ivy Poe knocked with a pan of cornbread because she had seen my light, and she sat down and did not ask me a single question about any of it. She looked at the 2 envelopes on the table for a second. Then she got up and put her cup in my sink and said, "Whatever you do in there, don't do it fast." I put both envelopes on the passenger seat and I did not sleep much. The title company on Market Street has a conference room with a fake walnut table and 6 chairs on casters and a coffee pot that had been on since 7. There were 6 of us. Denise, the closing officer, with 2 stacks of paper squared up in front of her. A notary from the front desk. A young man in a quarter zip representing the investor out of Nashville. Bree, in a chair against the wall with her water bottle. And my brother, in a button-down shirt, which I had not seen him wear since the funeral. He stood up when I came in, and Bree said his name once, quietly, and he sat back down. Denise asked if I was with the buyer. I said no, ma'am. I said my name, and I set the banker's box on the table, and I told her, in the same voice I used on the phone for 7 years with people who were crying, that I was the current holder of a charged-off account with a face balance of $61,300, that the seller had signed as guarantor on it, that I had the bill of sale and the chain of title in the box, and that I would like 5 minutes before anybody signed anything. The room got very quiet except for the printer, which was still running the last page of something and did not know any better. Dale's face went through about 4 things. He said my name. Then he said, "You can't do this." And his voice was fine on you and fine on can't, and it broke in half on the word poplar. The young man in the quarter zip looked at his phone, then at Denise, and asked how long this was going to take, because he had a 2 o'clock in Farragut. Denise ignored him. She has done this for 20 years. She looked at me over the top of her glasses and asked me the only question that actually mattered in that room, in the flattest, most professional voice I have ever heard. "Ma'am," she said, "are you filing?" "No," I said, and I pushed the second envelope across the fake walnut. I told them exactly what I wanted, in order, the way I would have laid it out for a stranger on a payment call. 1. Dale signs a consent judgment for $61,300, admitting the debt and admitting he signed it personally, and that document does not get filed anywhere. It comes home in my purse. 2. He pays it on a plan. 240 payments of $255 a month, no interest. First one due the 3rd of November, last one due the 3rd of October 2046, and because the arithmetic does not come out even, the final payment is $355. 3. If he misses one, the consent judgment goes to the clerk that week and becomes a lien, and he already knows what a lien does to a man who owns a shop. Nobody said anything. The investor's agent had stopped looking at his phone. I said the rest of it plainly. I am not taking the house. I am not stopping this sale. I am not contesting the will, and I never will. Dale asked me why, and he asked it like a man who genuinely wanted a reason he could hold, so I gave him his own sentence back, and I did not raise my voice to do it. "Nobody owes me a house for showing up," I said. "You owe me $61,300. Then Bree asked from the wall, in a small voice, what I was going to do with the money every month. "Nothing," I said. "Every account has a person on the other end. I just wanted you to know which end you were on." And then I told them the last condition, the one that was not money, and it was the only time my voice did anything at all. Before the keys change hands, he takes down the doorframe between the kitchen and the hall at 118 Poplar Street. The whole casing, pencil marks and all. He does it himself, with his own tools, alone, and he brings it to 214 Hillcrest Lane. That is the deal. Take it or file me. He took it. Denise printed the consent judgment off a template she keeps for exactly nothing like this, and the notary stamped it, and my brother signed his name twice. The second signature came out crooked because his hand was going. Bree cried without making any noise at all, which is a skill women learn somewhere, and she did not speak to me, then or since. The young man from Nashville signed his stack immediately afterward and asked Denise about the wire, because to him nothing had happened. To him it was a Thursday and a closing that ran 12 minutes long. I stood up, put the consent judgment in the banker's box, thanked Denise by name because she had been decent, and walked out before they finished. I sat in my car in the lot behind the building. October in East Tennessee, low sun, everything the color of a paper bag.